Hey guys, it's Kristen here. And what if I told you that as modern women, we should be doing the opposite of everything that secular Western culture tells us to do? I'm so pumped for this interview, this conversation with Suzanne Venker, because that is what she believes. She's the author of 5 books, including 7 Myths of Working Mothers and The Flip Side of Feminism. She's a relationship coach and the host of the Suzanne Venker Show. And today we're going to get into all things womanhood, career, marriage, gender roles, kids, daycare. I mean, did I miss any of the hottest button topics? I don't think so. Suzanne is unafraid to say what is extremely cultural and politically incorrect, if I can get my words out, because she believes that there is a better path for women. And we're going to get into all of that today. So Suzanne, thank you for being bold and thank you for having this conversation with us today.
Thank you for that excellent description of who I am and what I am all about. That was awesome.
Okay, so you wrote an article recently, I think last month, literally titled, "To be happy, women must do the opposite of everything secular Western culture tells them." What does that mean?
Yeah. So technically that was written by Joy Pullman for the Federalist, and it was a review of my book, which is called How to Build a Better Life, a New Roadmap for Women Who Want to Prioritize Love and Family. So
got it. Okay.
So it is basically that. It's a countercultural roadmap for how to map out your life in such a way that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you are in a much happier place than the place that so many of the women that I coach currently every week are in. And it is not pretty. So let's start with what that looks like. How about that?
Yes, please.
The status quo is that women should worry about marriage later, worry about marriage and family later, put career front and center, make money, quote unquote, find themselves, utilize the 20s as though, it's like the best time ever and you don't have any responsibilities, and then do that other stuff later, right? That other stuff that's supposed
all that other stuff.
That is supposedly, I don't know, less exciting or less fulfilling or more it is more taxing. That's true. But as though it is, as though what you're going to do in your 20s is more meaningful. Let's put it that way. Then everybody kind of gets married eventually. Yeah, yada yada. You settle down, but that needs to be deprioritized in favor of this other thing. Now, this is still very new. This is not the way women have, been encouraged to go through life up until really about 20 years ago. I mean, and it's gotten considerably worse in the last 20 years. And the idea is awful. I mean, it's a terrible plan. You have a body, and that body has a mind of its own. And you have, as a woman, a foreshortened time frame in which to get your life in order that is different from a man's who, let's be honest, he can postpone family as long as he wants, and he can always marry a younger woman if he wants to. Happens all the time. That's, take that up with God or nature or whatever. I can't change that. So why do that? Why not work with the body God gave you and map out your life with the priority being, and this is assuming, of course, you want to get married and have a family. If you don't, fine. But most women do. So if you know that, I'm arguing that ultimately that should be the priority and the focus, and that your career should orbit around that rather than the other way around. And when you do that from the get-go and you start thinking that, finding my person is the number one most important thing in life, much more so than the career, because the career will ebb and flow and change, but who you choose to marry will ultimately have more effect on your happiness and well-being than anything else you do, bar none. I mean, and those of us who've been married for decades can assure you of that. And so it colors the direction that your life will take in 1,000 different ways. And because if you know that and are prepped for that, then why on earth would you not put it at the center and then kind of fit these other things that are more fleeting around that? And that's certainly the way I mapped out my life. It is very countercultural. It works. And we need to hear more about it. That's really the gist of it.
Yeah, we need to hear more about it. Why is nobody talking about this? What happened in the last 20 years that caused such a shift in what we prioritize and value as women?
Well, I mean, it technically goes back much farther than 20 years. It goes back to the feminist movement. But it took, of course, a long time. And there's been, I don't know, shifts in each decade that it's just gotten worse and worse and worse, and technology ramped it all up, and the desire to live for now, and not understanding delayed gratification, and all these deeper, more meaningful realities of life have been downplayed in favor of the here and the now and the one click and all of that. So that it got ramped up big time in the last 20 years. But of course, it started before that.
Okay.
It was a very
Yeah.
a very specific political move to get women out of the home and into the workforce, having fewer children. And look, it's working, right? Decades later, it's working. And get them on quote unquote equal par with men, as though the traditional role that men play in families, which is to be breadwinners and providers, is somehow a better life. And it was billed as that, like, hey, this other life, it's you have to sacrifice who you are as a human. You don't get any accolades. You don't get any rewards. You don't get paid for it. It's this thing that is going to pull at you and take from you rather than give. And that's the way it was billed for a super long time. And of course, that's very enticing, because it's true that it is a very taxing role and it's sacrificial.
You don't get paid for it.
Except now here's something that's interesting. You probably know in your generation, I don't know how old you are, but the younger set talks a lot about when they talk about marriage and finances, they talk about his and hers all the time. And it makes me nuts, because it shows just how clueless, through no fault of theirs, because of the way they've been taught, that they don't understand what marriage is. If you understand that marriage is a team effort, that you are working together as a team toward the same goal, even if you might perform different tasks within that unit, then you understand that when your husband makes money and you don't, for those years, let's say, when you're home, his money is your money. That's what it is. That's what marriage is. You are working for it every day. And a man who understands that, and most, I think, did until recently, I think even men have been as brainwashed as women, understood that this is our money. This is family money. This is ours. It's not yours and mine. So that whole concept of his and hers and yours and mine just did not exist until recently. And it's
interesting.
A really good indication
and that's
of the
something.
Mindset
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like even when we get married, we're still so individualistic, so independent, like not even, like you're saying, a team. It's yours, it's mine. And so of course that's going to naturally encourage this mode of like competition and comparison, because it's yours versus mine, instead of this attitude of like, it's ours and we're a family. What your successes are my successes, and vice versa.
And you will fail at marriage if you do not, if you have that mentality going in. And I do think the average young couple is encouraged to have that mindset going in and has never been told otherwise. And that is a huge reason why they're struggling.
Yes. Something my husband and I agreed to early on in our marriage was the language of how we talked about our finances. I worked part-time when we first got married. This is almost 13 years ago now. We're millennials, so we're like later 30s. And that was something we discussed. We were like, we are not going to talk about finances like it's what you bring in and what I bring in. We're never going to compare. It's going to be a team. The roles that we play in this family are equally valuable. And together we are pursuing success as a marriage, and then eventually with kids. And it was just so freeing for me as a woman, because I never felt that pressure. He's always made more money than me from the beginning. And right now, I make very little in comparison to him.
I get it.
But I don't view it that way. Yes. So I think that is a huge thing that women of my generation and the next one need to hear. I loved this post that I saw on Instagram. You said, what millennial women were groomed to do. And then you listed 5 specific, like a path, I guess, of how millennial women are groomed to like kind of follow this same path. You said 1, go to college and go into debt to do it, of course. 2, get a job, start your career. 3, get married. 4, have a baby. 5, go back to work and put your baby in daycare. So where is this path for millennial women? Is this what you're talking about? Like over the past 20 years, just kind of the default that women just kind of get into?
Yes, definitely. And it's coming at them from literally everywhere. We know it's coming from media. That's just a given. Hollywood, the news, anything on TV. I mean, that's a given. Certainly in our universities, because universities are focused on career, obviously. They don't talk about what's going to interrupt that career down the line. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Right.
And then even parents, and this is the part that's really hard for me. I think that even adults have an extremely difficult time going against the culture and telling their especially telling their daughters, or teaching their daughters differently, or let's see, tutoring or encouraging or mentoring or whatever their daughters differently than the way they do their sons. They think that's bad because everything's we're supposed to be the same and equal. And you think that you're talking to your daughter about how her life is going to look very different from the son's, that means you have either a lesser life, or you're not going to be able to do the things that you should be able to do because you're empowered and you're capable and all of that. At the end of the day, it's not about your abilities. I mean, that's why feminism ultimately stalled, because it's up against female nature, female desire, and it cannot compete with it. You can legislate opportunity, but you can't legislate desire. And what women are capable of and what they want are two different things.
Why do you think parents are feeling this need to tell their daughters those kind of things? Like, why are they so scared to embrace womanhood and embrace her biological clock and like think about these things practically?
Well, I think for one thing, it's like we said, it's very countercultural to do that. And I think human nature is such, no matter how old you are, 15 or 55, it's very difficult to go against what everybody else is saying. It just is. So there's that. And you also have a lot of parents who have their own regrets, right? And so I hear from women constantly whose mothers told them to never depend on a man. And some of them, but this is the part that's shocking. Like, I get it when the parents divorced. I mean, they still shouldn't have said it that way, but I understand where it's coming from if they're divorced. But sometimes you have even long-standing married parents, some women who even stayed home, who don't encourage their daughters in that path, which you can imagine what that makes the daughter think. Like, God, have you been miserable all this time? Or like, it's totally messes with your head and makes you wonder about your own parents' marriage. So I think, I think there's some personal reasons there that parents don't, or for the reasons why parents give the messaging that they do to their kids.
How do you think we as women, I'm thinking of my generation, the generation after me. I've got a sister that's like in her early 20s. So it's just interesting even comparing kind of the things that I feel pressured in, the things that she feels pressured in. How do you want women to think differently about a career and motherhood?
I want them, well, number one, first and foremost is you have to think counterculturally. That's number one. You have to get comfortable with that. Number two, I want you to pan out and think long term and not think about the next 5 years. Where do you want to be 10 or 15 years from now? And what are the steps that are going to help you get there? So if you know you want to get married and have a family, and you know you want to stay home for X amount of years in the early years, let's just go with that as a baseline. There are so many decisions that you have to make prior to that event to set yourself up for that. And if you're following the culture, you're going to end up calling me, like so many women who are 35 do, and say, oh my God, I want to stay home and I can't. Financially, we can't afford it. My husband doesn't make enough money. We're in debt, yada, yada. Well, and of course, at that point, can it be turned around? Yeah, but it is extremely difficult. So I'm saying, why go through all that for political reasons? Because that's really what this comes down to, is that you were sold a bunch of lies for political gain that you could give a crap about. It's not servicing you. It's servicing this very small minority of women who live in a very different world than you do. And so you've been following a path that services them, not you. That's so wrong on every level. So they're not interested in helping you or making you happy or helping you create a happy life. They're interested in their own thing. So that's why being countercultural is so crucial. But if you pan out and look at it long term, you say, okay, who I marry is going to affect everything else.
Yes.
Everything. I mean, like, it's everything. Your career is likely going to change over time. How many people do you know who actually work 10, 15 years later in the degree that they majored in college and whatever they started out doing?
Right.
But you can't just swap out husband after husband, right? Every time you screw it up, right? So
let's hope not.
You've got to weigh that. You've got to give it the weight that it needs to set yourself up. So I'm saying reverse what you're told. Take dating seriously. Quit messing around with men who don't want what you want. don't be afraid to say what you're looking for from the get-go. I mean, if you are dating someone, you should know, honestly, in the first couple of dates, whether or not it's a match. That doesn't even go on anymore because there's no plan for dating. There's no structure. It's just, you should be talking about everything within the first couple of dates, about who you are, where you came from, what you want, where you're going. And if the person isn't going where you're going and doesn't have the same mindset, you're not sharing those values and goals, then right away get out and go to the next one. You know, there's too much time wasted in the dating process. So that's a big piece of it. And then, you know, the idea of living with somebody before you're married. I mean, the amount of time you're going to waste doing that and having it not work out just to start over again. I mean, it's just a crapshoot. You know, that's the way that it's being done. And there's a completely different way to go about it.
How would you turn what millennial women are being groomed for, that the quote that I read earlier from you, you know, go to college, get a job, get married, have a baby. How would you flip that order? Would you modify that? I mean, what would you say to a woman who's like, okay, I see that path. How do I do things differently to prioritize family, marriage, motherhood, and make that more the center?
So the number one most important thing is to choose a career that works well with motherhood. And this is going to be very well, again, I keep saying countercultural, but it's also controversial because the idea is that
it is.
Well,
yes,
because you're supposed to be able to do whatever you want in the sky's the limit and go to the moon,
right?
President. Well, yeah, you can do that. I'll support you if you want to do that. But hey, here's what you need to know. You will have no life outside of those things. If you shoot that high, that's it for you. Like, there's no space for anything else. There is no rich personal life. There is no building of a family or relationships that are healthy and work and function well. Like, it's not possible. So what are you willing to give up? And so understand that every choice you make has a trade-off. And what are the trade-offs that you are willing to make? And when you have that conversation and it's framed in that way, you start to think differently about careers. So, okay, it might work that you could give yourself completely to your work for the next 5 to 7 years. Sure. And then you think, oh, I'm going to postpone marriage because that's what the culture tells me to do. So, okay, but then what's going to happen with the career that you've built and that you're doing 100% of your time when all of a sudden your priority shifts? Because you can take it to the bank that your priorities are going to shift dramatically somewhere around the age of 30, and that biological clock is going to start ticking, and you're going to give a flying crap about your career. I mean, you just will not. You are going to be laser focused on getting married and having babies. And that just changes the whole trajectory of everything. Well, if you talk about that in advance and know that and prepare for that, then you won't get yourself in that position by choosing a career that will that motherhood can accommodate 10 years down the road.
That is a huge one. We call it here at Girl Define, we've used the phrase like choosing a path that's hospitable toward motherhood. So something that it welcomes motherhood. It allows room for motherhood rather than basically, like you're saying, you're choosing a path that it's like you either have to get off of that path or like, I mean, it's going to, thinking down the road. And I loved something that you had said, you also posted on Instagram was along these same lines. You said, choose a career motherhood can accommodate. Yes, that means some careers will be off the table. Like you said, controversial to even say. Making any choice means the other one will be off the table. All choices have trade-offs. Make a choice, create a life around it, and don't look back.
Yeah. That's good. I said that? That's great.
Yeah. Don't you love hearing yourself quoted? You're like, boom.
I mean, when you write, when you have written as much, I should say, as I have over the years, I sometimes forget exactly how you phrase something. But that is it in a nutshell. And it's supposed to be so controversial. And yet it's so logical. It's so practical. And it's so helpful for creating a workable life. I mean, what is the goal? Is it really to prove that you can do whatever a man can do? If that is your number one focus in life, okay, go for it. That there's no space for anything else, because that's going to color every other decision you make if that really is your goal. And let's be honest, that's not most women's goal at all.
Right. At least what they admit out loud, right? It's like what you say and what you really feel in your heart, or like you're saying, the seasons change. What you think is the most important thing when you're 21 versus like 31, that decade of time, just that shift. So like, how do you convince younger women to value things that they're like, I'm not even thinking about motherhood or marriage. Like I'll think about that in a decade. How do you get through to them to help them like expand their vision beyond just like the next few years?
It's admittedly difficult because there is no question that you're not thinking the same way at 23 as you are at 33. So it's really the best way to do it is to bring as many, 30-year-olds into their world who thought like them at one point and then gave them stories about what did or didn't work based on the way they were thinking 8 years earlier. That's very, very cool. But I think also knowing your why and your long-term goal. So even if you're not feeling it in the moment, you say, I'll do that later. Just asking somebody, well, what do you envision? What do you really want? Like, what do you want from life? What's the most important thing? And if you tap into that desire, I mean, even if you're not thinking about it and thinking about it, even though you're thinking differently about it at 23, you presumably would know what's most important to you in terms of what you want out of life. So most people, I just don't think they would say, I want to be, the most important thing to me is to make a lot of money and be at the top of my career for my entire life. Like, I don't believe that. That's not what most women would say, even at 23. Even at 23. Even they know, well, there's more to life than that. And so you really want to tap into what they want and then what the steps are to help them get there.
I was talking to some younger women the other day, and it's very interesting. Like I'm talking, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. They are so afraid to even say that they want to get married and have kids one day. Like you ask them, so, what are you going to do over the next couple of years? Or what do you envision for your future? Why are you going to college? What's your goals? And it's like you can just tell, it's like they get into this mode of let me list off every single possible way that I'm going to be the most successful in all these different areas, but they don't mention motherhood or marriage. But I know these girls, I know they want to get married. I know they want to be moms. Why are they so afraid to say that?
So that shows you, doesn't it, how far we have devolved as a country, because this was not the case 30, 40 years ago or any time before that. I mean, it was just a given that that's what we're here for, that that's what most people want to do, that that's where meaning, creating a family and having a family and raising a family is the most meaningful thing you'll ever do. Like that was just such a given. That's what I meant when I said like the last 20 years have just blown up this conversation. Because the value shift in this country has become so money focused, so materialistic, so obsessed with fame and fortune. And really, it's just money, even building wealth and all that, which I'm all for building wealth. And by the way, you can build it a lot faster when you're married than when you're single. That's a whole other conversation. So yet another reason to get married. But yeah, it's very sad and very hard, but you have to say to the person, if you could say anything without any judgment whatsoever from anybody, what do you really want?
Yeah.
Really think. We're going to be in a room right now, and I have absolutely no judgment for what's going to come out of your mouth. I want to know what you really feel in your heart. There's not, I mean, they're not asked that very often, right? But I bet if they were, you'd get something real.
Yes. If there was like, you're not allowed to lie. You can't. Right. You have to tell the truth right now. There was one young woman recently who actually said the unspeakable, she said, honestly, I'm going to school, I'm getting this, this degree or whatever, but truly in the end, my dream is to be a wife and mom. And it just felt foreign almost to even hear her speak those words out loud, because you so rarely hear anyone even say that I was just like, I had to affirm her. I'm like, I am so proud of you for saying that, because that's truly what you desire. And you're acknowledging that, and you're not afraid to speak those words out loud. And you're acknowledging that it's a valuable path to pursue. So I was just so encouraged that there are still some women young women who are willing to say that. But why would you, Like, why do you believe in all of your research and writing, or yes, go ahead, you have something to add?
Look at what happened with Harrison Butker's speech,
Mm-hmm,
where he said what
mm-hmm.
he said to the young women in the
Yep.
audience. The reaction to it's not so much what he said, it's the reaction. That reaction would
Mm-hmm.
not have happened 20, 30 years ago. That's what I'm saying. I mean, yes, it's different from what you normally hear. And so he had a lot of courage to do that. But nobody would be aghast at the thought that you would say, hey, really, the most important thing in life is probably going to be this other thing. You know, could he have said it better? Sure, probably. But that's not even what I mean. I'm just talking about the reaction being so severe. Just
Yes.
shows you how
Yes.
messed up we have become, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah. Like in all of your research, what you have studied, obviously I've heard you say a lot on this topic, but how, I don't even know like how to put the question, as far as women valuing motherhood, valuing marriage. I mean, what would you say to women who are like, I'm still not convinced. I still feel like pursuing my career, first 10 years of my life, like that's going to be the center and everything else will kind of fit around it. Why do you believe that women will be maybe happier if they actually pursued marriage and family and made that the center?
Because that's what is natural. That is what we're made for. That is what your natural state for most women. Yes, there are outliers. There will always be people who don't want to take the quote unquote natural or traditional path, but they are not the norm. They've been presented now as the norm, as though this very deep desire that comes blaring forth when you're around 30 years of age. We pretend that that's not going to happen to the majority of them, and it will. So look, let's say you don't know whether you want to get married and have babies and stay home with them for 5 years. Let's just say that. Let's just say you don't have any idea. You're still better off assuming that you will, not that you won't, so that you have the option 10 years down the road to do that. Even if you did put it off so long that you could only have, let's say, one child because you waited too long or whatever, which is another taboo thing to say. Assume that you will, not that you won't. If you assume that you won't, you're going to make a series of decisions that you're going to get stuck later on, and you're not going to have any options.
Yes.
So you're assuming that you're always going to think and feel the way you do for your whole life. And that's honestly, that's just really dumb. That's just really short-sighted. I mean, and immature to actually think you're not going to change the way you think and what your priorities are forever. Like, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Just assume that you will. If you can make decisions based on the assumption that you will, and you change your mind and you don't want to, you haven't done anything. You're not any worse off, but you have set yourself up. So in other words, let's say I have in one of my books, I said, marry the accountant, not the artist. And the gist of that chapter was, that very old school advice of, make sure you have married man who can take care of you, which is an extremely taboo thing to say today, because the assumption is that you don't need him because you're capable of doing this on your own.
Right.
Well, that is very true. But going back to what I said originally, that doesn't mean you're not going to want the option when and if you do get married to step out for a season. And I can't tell you the number of people I hear from like, well, my husband doesn't make enough. Well, what's he do? Well, he's looking for himself, or, he's a whatever it is. Like, you want to make sure that when you get married, you're marrying somebody who's on a path. He doesn't need to be rich. He just needs to be on a path.
Yeah.
And know where he's going, and then agree with you about being the provider for X amount of years while you're home. So if you haven't been taught to look for that because that's, retro or whatever, and then you get yourself into that boat later, you have no options. That's it. You are provider your entire life. And those are the people I end up coaching, by the way. And I'm telling you, their marriages are a mess.
These are the women. They come to you in their 30s and they're unhappy. They're like, my life is not what I thought it would be. I bought this bill of goods. I bought into this path, and now I hate it. I mean, is that what you're seeing for a lot of women?
They've been groomed to be men. They've been groomed to be providers their entire life, as though their bodies don't do something different from a man's.
Yes.
So they're not going to be pregnant for 9 months, and they're not going to give birth,
Right.
and they're not going to breastfeed, and they're not going to have this desire to nest. They're raised with the lie that they're no different from men. So they've created lives like the way men create theirs. And then they get stuck and they're like, and they're it's terrible. Their mental health is a mess because they have to get up and go to work when they've been up all night with the baby crying and they don't want to go to work. Well, of course you don't. You just gave birth.
Yes.
It's just it's a mess. That's why I wrote this book, and that's why I'm so strident about this issue. I don't want you to get
I can't tell.
I don't want you to call me later.
Yes, I can't tell that you're passionate at all about this.
No.
Yeah. Because you've seen it play out again and again. I'm sure for you in some ways it's like a broken record. Like, ladies, wake up.
Yes. And it's so wrong because it's not their fault. Honestly, it's the generation before them. And it's all been done in the name of politics. You have been used as a pawn for a political game that has no basis or bearing on your reality or your desires. And that is wrong. That's morally wrong that it's happened. You deserve to know some politically incorrect facts so that you can map out a happy life.
Amen. Okay, let's talk really quick about the roles of men and women. Another highly controversial thing to even bring up, but they're not interchangeable, is what I'm hearing you say, that men and women are designed biologically, I believe, by God, to fulfill two very different roles. And you had what I thought was like, boom, baby, but I know some people are going to find this very offensive. Another quote from you, you said, of course, there's a difference between a man being married to a woman without a job and a woman being married to a man without a job. No comparison. So tell us a little bit more about what you meant by this.
I mean, come on. First of all, common sense. People feel this and know this, even if they haven't experienced it, in my opinion. But it's very easy to feel like men and women are, quote unquote, equal, as in the same, up until the point of when the children come. Because when you look at their lives, they do look very similar. You both go to school, or not, or you both go into the working world and you get married and you have this whole life before you have a baby that, you kind of do feel and seem interchangeable. You both do the dishes, you both, everything's kind of fine. It's the arrival of children that just completely upends all of that. And why is that? Well, like I said before, women are the ones who get pregnant. Women are the ones who give birth. Women are the ones who breastfeed. Women are the ones who want to nest, and it comes barreling forth around the age of 30. They want to be home. They want to take care of their babies. That's like the most normal and natural thing in the world. Yeah. Do men's priorities change too? Yes, absolutely. But the timeline and the urgency isn't the same, number one. Also, when the baby comes, a woman's instinctual reaction is to take care of the baby emotionally, not financially. She doesn't want to run back and go make some money. She wants to take care of her baby. That's not what happens to a man. When a man doesn't have less of a desire to earn money when he becomes a father. His desire to earn ramps up. It doesn't recede, it ramps up. Because his natural role at that point, he can't breastfeed. He didn't give birth. He's not going to have the same reaction. He's like, I got to provide. Right. When you know and understand those differences biologically and understand that they are equal in value, but wildly different in what and how they operate, you're no longer offended the way feminists want you to be offended in thinking that these are competing roles. They're not competing. They're supposed to work in conjunction with one another. They're not in competition. So there is no better or worse. It's just very, very different. I mean, what kind of society tells women who have just gone through this huge life-altering event with this helpless infant who wants his mom and says, get back to work, go make money and put your kid in daycare? Like, what is that? That's not a healthy, good society. That's not normal. And nobody talks about the fact that women need their babies. That we do talk somewhat about what babies need and what's best for babies. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that the mom needs the baby as much as the baby needs the mom.
Yeah. Yeah. We just ignore it and act like it's not a biological reality. Like there's no hormones, there's no connection going on here. It's completely neutral and the baby can have the father or mother. Like there's this kind of, I feel like this movement, or I don't know, just this trend of like stay at home dads where they're like, I'm going to be the one that stays home with the baby and my wife's going to go to work. And it's just viewed as like completely neutral. Like the roles are interchangeable. There's no distinction, no difference. One can stay home, the other can stay home. It doesn't really matter. It's like draw a name out of a hat and there you go kind of thing. Is that's also coming from this whole idea that the man and the woman, that there's just no difference.
Absolutely. That's where that comes from. And to pretend as though there's that is not going to blow up in your face, because it will. It will. I work with them all the time.
Okay, tell us about that. Tell us about that.
I mean, are there people that you could find that completely reverse roles and it works? Sure. Okay, they're the outliers. There's always outliers. But as a general rule, when most people attempt that, for one thing, a man is sort of prone to want to do what his wife wants him to do. So if the wife wants to go back to work and he is willing to stay home, a lot of men will do that. Is that where their deepest desire comes from? Is that what they want to do? No, not for most of them. They need to provide. And when they're not providing, they do not feel good about themselves. It's really the opposite of the woman who is putting herself in the male role, but she wants to be with her baby, but she's pushing herself away because she's, whatever reasons she's doing what she's doing, she's having to keep at bay the feelings that she'd rather be with the baby. It's the reverse. She also struggles mightily with jealousy, with the closeness that a baby will have with a father, which is not typically how it works if it were reversed in the more natural state. Men don't feel jealous of that because they're doing what they do best, which is providing. And they want to provide for their wife and baby. But how many women do you know who will say, I want to provide for my man, and that's why I'm going to work? Not many, if any. That's not the reason why they're going. They might say they're going for money reasons, but they don't do it because I want to provide for my man. They don't have that providing piece in them that the men do. So typically when men and women reverse roles, it really, really ruins the marriage. And that's just not my opinion. That's actually been studied, and there's plenty of research showing that it does not work when you reverse roles to that degree, where it's that extreme. Stay at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not saying not at all to reverse them, but to reverse them to that degree.
Yes. Where it's like basically completely flipped.
Yes,
yeah.
right.
That's so interesting. I know we're going to wrap it up here in just a minute, but I want to get to the most controversial of all, I think, which is the topic of daycare, and a place that many women find themselves feeling like they have no other option because of this path that they've taken and the place they find themselves in their 30s. But you said there's something very wrong about a society that expects, encourages, or even pressures its women to return to the marketplace after bringing new and completely dependent life into this world. So you had already made the point about just our society. There's something terribly wrong with it, where we as women, we feel this pressure from the outside of, in order to be successful, in order to have worth, in order to be accomplished, I have to leave my baby at home and I have to get back out into the workforce, which means who's watching baby? Most men aren't excited about being stay-at-home dads. I feel like the majority of men are also working. And so now you have the working mom, the working dad, the newborn baby, and there are only so many options. So can we talk about just like that whole dynamic, that struggle of women at that stage in their life?
Well, they need to first understand that this goes back to the basis of what we've having this conversation about, which is that you've been lied to. You've been lied to. The values that you've been encouraged to follow go against what is in your heart. And if you feel that you do not want to be away from your baby and you're doing it anyway, that's a huge red flag that you should be paying attention to. Now, the world will tell you that's guilt being thrust upon you by society, and that we need to get rid of the way we make women feel guilty. And I'm saying, no.
Right.
If you feel that internally, that's your conscience talking. That is your body telling you this isn't right. I don't feel right about this. Therefore, it isn't right. And that's the conclusion you should come to. which again is why you have to, the whole message of this is to be countercultural, because if you're going to do the opposite, remember, if you want to win in all of these things, you do the opposite of what you're told. So if the culture says, don't pay attention to the way you're feeling, that's just, your baby will be fine, society is just making you feel that way, that's an indication right off the bat, wait a minute, but it doesn't jive with how I'm feeling, and I'm going to trust how I'm feeling. So then you're like, okay, you want to go with what you want to do and what your heart is telling you. And then they say, oh, I can't afford it. And that's when you just have to get out the paper and pen and really do the math of all of this. And is it really coming out in the wash for you to be working from a financial standpoint? And for most people, the answer is no. You'd have to both be making over 6 figures, each person, for it to come out in the wash financially. And which I wouldn't even want you to do it then, because I don't care about that. I'm saying just if you're looking at the numbers, though.
Right.
If you wanted to make an argument for finances, that's the only way that would work, because the daycare costs are so high. And they've really always been high, but of course they've gotten considerably worse in the last few months.
Right.
It's just not coming out in the wash for the lifestyle that you're creating to bring in $10,000 a year, an extra $10,000 a year when you subtract all the work-related costs and the childcare costs and all of that. So when people see that on paper and you can present it in a, again, countercultural way, just a practical way that matches what they really want and give them permission to think opposite of what all their friends and sometimes their family, that's why it's such a tall order. This is so much about mindset. It's so much about having blindly followed this script and not realizing that there's a completely different way you can do life, but you have to first be open to going against the script. Otherwise it won't work. If you need to be doing what everybody else around you is doing, you're going to really struggle with this.
It's like at a fundamental basic level, like you're saying, you've got to re-brainwash yourself, but in the opposite direction.
And then of course get educated about the early years, which of course women or men do not have a proper education on what's going on in those early years, and attachment and bonding and how that stays with you for life if it's broken and not if babies don't, or young people do not attach themselves to their primary caregiver, preferably mom, and they're passed around from caregiver to caregiver. They just don't understand what's going on. They really don't. They don't understand the the significance of sleep in the early years.
Yes.
None of that. They're not taught that. So they just
that's a huge topic.
It's huge. So they need almost a forced education. Like I studied this in college. So people who study it in college obviously have a leg up on this, but most people don't. So but it's my belief that everybody should be forced, like it's a mandatory conversation, a mandatory education, if not in high school, but in college, before you're allowed to graduate, that you have to learn about the early years. I would love that. I would support that.
Can you imagine? Yeah. Can you imagine if that was actually happening? It's like that sounds like a foreign planet. Like what in the world that we're living in today. So just briefly, I know that's like an entire conversation in and of itself. Just briefly give women a vision of why it's so valuable for the mother to have that early bonding, being the caretaker for her baby versus daycare, why they're not just both 50-50, decisions.
So your baby is born wanting you. He wants you. He smells you. He was inside you. He feels you. It's instinctive for him to want you. That's why when you're holding your newborn, he's looking at you like you are God. I mean, you are the world. Why? First of all, why would you want to give that up? I mean, why would you experience that and not want to be with that all the time? The weight of it, just from a selfish point of view, it's like, when are you ever going to be that important again? There is nowhere else you're going to be that important. So there's that piece of it. And then there's understanding that he wants to bond with you. That's where the breastfeeding comes in. And even if you don't breastfeed, if you're you can even bond while you're bottle feeding. But it takes a long time to establish the pattern of healthy sleep and bonding and food and all those things that go on in the first 3 to 5 years, 3 years really, but 3 to 5 are important. It's a very slow process that has developmental stages, and we're trying to rush babies and toddlers through that process and hurry up and get out the door and go into the world. They're not ready yet. And you have to teach them how to love, how to be resilient, how to know that when you leave, you're going to come back. Not 10 hours later, but 5 minutes later. Like there's just a whole thing that's going on in those early years that is crucial for their development, that bonds them to you and gives them a secure base that they know that they can fall back on and that will carry them that they will carry with them through life. And if it's interrupted and if they don't get that security, that will stay with them for life.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get that in daycare.
What are some...
That's not possible because you have a running merry-go-round of caregivers who are coming and going all the time. There's no bonding going on. Yeah.
Right. And I think women, what I've heard is they just feel like, well, being a mom, it's basically just a caregiving role. I mean, I'm just like the caregiver. So what's the difference if another person's the caregiver? What would you say to a woman who has that mindset? Like, oh, daycare, it's just someone else caring for them like I would be at home.
Well, I would repeat everything I just said, that obviously the person at the daycare can't do that. Well, first of all, they don't love your baby. You love your baby. No one's going to give your baby what you would naturally give them. They're just another name face coming through.
It's a job. It's just, they're getting paid.
They'd be there if they weren't paid. I mean, your baby doesn't mean anything to them.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry. It's just a body. Really. In and out. It's just too big of a system. Now if you had an in-home daycare with one person with two babies, now that's a different story, so not all daycare is equal. I'm talking about institutional daycare where their numbers are just ginormous.
What about the woman who hires a nanny? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
You mean in his home or?
Right. Like mom is gone at work, nannies. Well, mom is gone working full time, and there's one nanny that comes into the home to watch the one baby.
So there's an order of quality care. It basically goes like this: mom, dad, grandma, or other trusted family member who's not leaving, nanny, in-home daycare, and daycare, institutional daycare. So nanny is good if she sticks around. And that's very difficult to find. The days of bringing a nanny in and staying for 18 years that doesn't happen anymore. So what's going to happen for many babies is they're attaching themselves to this nanny that they spend 40, 50 hours a day with while mom isn't there. And more often than not, that nanny leaves. And that's when his world will implode because you have just given him somebody to bond with who's going to disappear. So it's better than daycare, but it's not better than you, and it's not comparable to you because you aren't leaving. You're never leaving. You are never, ever leaving. Neither is the grandma. Neither is the dad. Neither is the mom. That's the difference between family and hired help. And so it's you just don't want to disappear 40 or 50 hours during these years, bottom line. I mean, maybe 10 hours a max a week. Maybe. Ideally, you'd be at home with help if you're going to do it, not disappear.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. And there's so many more things I want to get into, but we are out of time. So everybody just go read all of Suzanne's books and follow her on Instagram and all that good stuff. If you're like, we barely scratched the surface and I need a lot more of this because I haven't heard anyone talking like this, then yes, you have a lot more to offer. So where can people find you, follow you? What book? You have many books. Which one are you like? Start with this one first.
My most recent is the one I'm talking about the most, obviously. It's called How to Build a Better Life, a new roadmap for women who want to prioritize love and family. And my website is my name, Suzanne Venker, SuzanneVenker.com. And literally everything is there. My new venture is Substack. I kind of just started this. So if you're a Substack follower or Substack person, then come and join for sure as a subscriber, because that's where I'm going to be really going forward.
Awesome. As we wrap it up, any final words that you want to say to the many young women listening?
Just know that there's another way than the way that you have been hearing your whole life, and be open to it. And you will be very happy if you are and you do 10 years from now. If they're that young, depending on how old they are.
I love it. Yes, I love it. Suzanne, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for being a bold and courageous voice. You are unafraid, you are unashamed, and you are helping thousands of women. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Kristen, for having me. I appreciate it.